On 9 o'clock. I know we're going to record this webinar. So, good evening, everybody. Those who are joining us for the first time, we welcome you from the India Child Protection Medical Professionals Network. And we have a very distinguished speaker today. It's a privilege to warmly welcome Justice Geeta Mittal on the behalf of the ICP Medical Professionals Network. Welcome, ma'am. It's really an honor that you have taken the time to come and speak to us. Uh, Geeta Mittalji is a pioneer. She's a stalwart in her field, and she's always worked extremely hard to find solutions to make justice accessible, courts more humane and relevant. And to the last person, she to me, she has always appeared very calm and very assuring, very full of energy, and the amount of compassion and sensitivity she has shown during the course of her work to bring justice to everybody is amazing. She's recently retired as a Chief Justice of Jammu and Kashmir, and she's had an extraordinary career. She has so much more to contribute. I was looking at some of her quotes, and ma'am, if you permit me, I just want to say that one of the quotes, she said that it is very necessary that we look for unique solutions to provide for unique problems that exist. And she started when she was in Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, started the Insaf Ki Dastak. This was her answer to the unique solutions at Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh region. As a judge, this program is very unique because in this, the judges are now going to travel in far-flung, hard-to-reach access areas which are cut off from the mainstream and be able to provide justice to people at the doorsteps. And so this is amazing. And recently, she received a very high level international award. That's the Arlene Patchett Global Vision Award by the International Association for Women Judges. And this is the first by an Indian jurist. And this just happened on May 5th. And we are privileged to have you, ma'am. And this is really something that we doctors have never had a opportunity to listen to someone who's a senior justice. So warm welcome. And I want to really thank Professor Jagdish Narayan Reddy for bringing us a kind introduction to Justice Geeta Mittalji. So I want to hand over to Jagdish to moderate, to introduce Geeta Mittal, as he knows her so much well and they work together. So over to Jagdish.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. Madam, though she is the retired Chief Justice, so for us, she is always an affectionate madam where we always look out for solutions. She is a crusader of rights of oppressed. Her path-breaking judgments, particularly vulnerable sector, particularly looking at women rights, children, minorities, LGBTQI. So you can listen to her. She has brought in a lot amount of policy changes. She always puts those policy changes to practice. Look out, she was the first to bring out that vulnerable witness procedures across in all the courts. Those were the path-breaking things. Now across the country, we have those changes. Medical examination procedures, what we have seen, particularly in the sexual violence sector also, you would listen to her. She was the first who brought in changes in this country through her judgments when she was in the High Court of Delhi. Uh, Even in Jammu Kashmir, apart from what Rajiv was pointing it out, bringing the courts to the doorsteps of the far-reaching places of Jammu Kashmir, she also first coined the situation of sextortion. So that was something unique, extortion happening along with the crime of sexual violence. So it was recognized as a separate crime, and that is something unique which people have looked in. Her passion for bringing child protection particularly in the judiciary. There are several stakeholders working in the various fields, but when you look at judicial system, we can always look at Justice Geeta Mittal. So today, without wasting much time, we have already the participants have crossed 72. We have participants from all across the country, not only doctors, we have other people working on child protection issues. So I present to you all Justice Geeta Mittal. She will be speaking on child-friendly measures in the Indian judicial systems and doctors in the witness box. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Jagdish. Namaskar, Assalamu alaikum, salam. Good evening to all my friends. Actually, Jagdish tells me 70 and I'm speaking to 70, largely doctors, pediatricians. You've made me very nervous, Jagdish. But the topic is one which is so dear to my heart. Firstly, let me confess, this is surreal for me. I've never spoken on such a serious matter at 9 o'clock in the evening. And all of you are so hardworking. I know what doctors are like. My only other sibling is a younger sister who's a doctor. She's a pharmacologist in the Maulana Azad Medical College. And my brother-in-law is a cardiologist. So I know what a doctor's day is like. And clinicians, pediatricians in these times must be going through such a difficult time and such hard times. So, my greatest respects to all of you. I hold all of you in such high esteem and so much regard. And I'm truly privileged and honored that Rajiv and Dr. Jagdish actually think that, you need a conversation from me on this topic, Now, the topic has been, captioned as this was carved out by Jagdish and Rajiv, Dr. Rajiv said, child-friendly measures in Indian judicial systems and doctors in the witness box. So our conversation today evening is restricted to children and doctors located in the witness box. To contextualize, now a witness box is not a standalone location. It includes the court where it is located. The court may be one where either civil cases are being heard or criminal cases. In some courts in India, both civil or criminal cases are heard by the same court. It would include the passage to the courtroom where you have to testify. We don't know whether there is a waiting room for witnesses or not, and you may be hanging around in the corridor waiting for the case in which you have to give your evidence to be called out or not. Your court may be one of several courts, many times even more than 100, 200 courts in the same complex. So what can be very daunting for a child and for you as a first-time visitor to the court is the very size of the court complex, let alone the demeanor, the bearing of the court, the formality of the court, the black and white uniform of the lawyers, the court staff, the judges. How many courts are there in the district court is also something that will daunt you. The entrance to the court is also what comprises the court. And also, what is the kind of the court that you're going to? You may be visiting a family court, you may be visiting the Juvenile Justice Board, or you may be visiting a court which is doing criminal or civil court where you have been called as a witness. The biggest problem that a witness faces is the interface in a criminal case with the offender. You may be a child, you may be adult, you may be an expert witness as a doctor, but your biggest problem, the biggest tension that would appear is, and this is more so with the child, the interface with the offender. In a child custody case, the interface with the other parent, that is the parent other than the one with whom's custody the child is. In a civil case, with the other side. Now, in most court complexes, there are no waiting rooms for witnesses. A witness is totally lost in the system, even though he is called the eyes and ears of the court. So I was very sensitive to this, and I extensively have visited courts, the court complexes, trial courts in other countries. And in the United Kingdom, I found they have a very elaborate procedure for seating witnesses. The witnesses are treated with real respect. and you report to a counter, witness reporting counter, and you're escorted to a waiting room where you sit in the court as your case is called out, and it's for the responsibility of the in charge of the witness room to ensure that he or she keeps track of your case and coordinates with the court, and you're taken to the courtroom when the witness is called out. I was able to build such facilities in Jammu and Kashmir for witnesses. This is adult witnesses. This would mean expert witnesses. This would mean doctor witnesses. I'll talk to you about the child-friendly measures separately, but this is generally witness waiting rooms which were introduced in the Srinagar district courts and a few other trial courts in Jammu and Kashmir might be. Now, so far as the law is concerned, which is I'll restrict it to this discussion largely to the criminal case. We have only 1 hour, and it's too small to go in detail into the other jurisdictions, largely to criminal cases. But procedure is governed in law by the Code of Criminal Procedure in criminal cases, the Code of Civil Procedure in civil cases, and the Indian Evidence Act, which guides the judge in recording the evidence in both civil and criminal cases. So far as these laws are concerned, the procedure which is prescribed is uniform. It is the same, be it an adult, be it a child, with very minor variations now being introduced in the very recent future. There is very little special dispensation for experts, which would include a scientific expert, a forensic expert, a handwriting expert, doctors, a chartered accountant, or other professionals. So there is the other thing which creates a little problem. I'm just pointing out to you largely the issues, and we'll come to the discussion a little later. Is the reluctance of judges to accept ignorance about the subject matter or issues. For instance, your testimony as a pediatrician or as a forensic expert, the judge may have little knowledge, half-baked knowledge, or biases, which may rule the manner in which he or she conducts the proceeding. And certainly the psychology of the witness, especially children, is something which very few judges will accept very willingly, that they do not know. Or the testimony of the expert, the language which a doctor speaks is something which is very different. We are not used to it as judges. I'm a former judge, of course, now. But this is, we must also bear in mind the large dockets which judges have. They're so bogged down with the number of cases on their board that, the nuances, the importance of bearing in mind the requirement of special provisions, special facilities for special groups like physically disabled, mentally challenged children, is really gets buried and lost in the sheer volume of the work which judges are handling, especially in trial courts. Let me illustrate with a real-time case history. I took out extracts. This was a case which was before me in 2009, when I was sitting as a single judge hearing criminal appeals. This is a case which is titled Virender versus State. It involves a child victim. The incident which was involved occurred on 28th of April 2005. Just 2 or 3 dates, easy to remember. At 10:30 a.m., the child complained of an incident of rape to her father. The MLC was recorded at 10:50 a.m. The testimony was not very significant. There were no very significant findings in the MLC. But what is significant is that her statement was recorded by the magistrate under section 164 of the CRPC. This is a statement which is, for bringing in credibility to the witness. Her statement gets the investigating officer takes the witness to the magistrate, and under section 164, a statement is recorded by the magistrate. It remains, its evidentiary value is minimal because it's a statement recorded in the absence of the accused. Law requires that the testimony of a witness must be recorded in the presence of the accused. So the testimony of this child witness was recorded at 10:50 a.m. and the investigating officer also recorded a statement on the same day, 28th of April 2005, in which he recorded the incident as one of galat kaam by the offender upon this child victim. You know, the 164 statement was recorded about 1 week later on 3rd May, in which this judge, the magistrate, records the acts done by the accused as Gandhi Harkate. Even she appeared and testified as a witness. And she appeared as PW1, that's prosecution witness number 1. This child again said that the accused had done galat kaam to her. When the judge asked us to illustrate and elucidate what she meant by galat kaam, this child rattled off as what a husband does with his wife in the night. Now, you know, what would be pertinent to understand here is to, you know, why I'm bringing out this language is in the context of what is related to you when you're recording history of, you know. Now, the MLC recorded the age of this child as 11 years. The radiologist opined upon a medical examination, her age between 12 to 13. So no doubt that she was a child on the date of the incident. But what is very important is that the acts which are attributed to the offender, galat kaam, buri harkate, gandhi harkate, do not bring out the ingredients of section 376, which was rape at the relevant time, which required penetration, you know. So the entire testimony of the child, you know, if you had to bring in a finding of guilt, was in the realm of conjectures and speculation. And it became necessary to examine the medical evidence. The MLC showed no injury, old tear on hymen. And, you know, the prosecutor read a text on rape in para 28. I've circulated this judgment to you. You know, the text on rape, I'll just tell you what the citation is. I think
Ma'am, I have shared that in the chat box also.
Okay. Para 28 is where I dealt with the MLC. Para 27 is where I've given the one fact was that the doctor who conducted the medical examination was not available to the prosecution. This is in para 27 because she had left the job and she was not produced in the witness box. And the document did not record any opinion on the examination which was conducted by the doctor. So what was read to me was medical jurisprudence and toxicology law and practice authored by Dr. K.S. Narayan Reddy. And what the learned author has said about the nature of the MLC in the incident case. But what was important is that when the MLC did not support the prosecution. Now, this boy was convicted by the trial court and he was in jail since 2005. And when I was hearing the appeal in 2009, it was a young boy of 19 years of age at that time who set up a defense that he had been falsely implicated because the father of the child had borrowed money and he had wanted the money, asked for the money back from the father. Now, after considering the legal judgments, you know, in the paras, what I want to point out in para 30, at the last line of para 30 was even the opinion with regard to rupture of a hymen has been held to be inconclusive so far as commission of an offense of rape is concerned. And even more significant, you must realize that medical evidence is really in the nature of an opinion by an expert, and it is open to the judge to accept it or reject it, you know. And what Dr. Jagdish Reddy and I have been saying repeatedly and pointing out to doctors that, you know, opinion has no evidence of rape or evidence of rape or rape had been done. Now, rape is not a medical term. Today, the definition of rape is so wide that it will be very difficult for doctors to give an opinion, you know, as to whether there was rape or not. But, you know, it is not open for a medical expert to opine as to whether rape is done or not, because rape is not a medical expression, you know. Now, in this case, when I looked at the testimony, now the child had said as to what did she mean by what is galat kaam, and she referred to what a husband and wife does at night, what a husband does. Now how to contextualize this? The trial court had not looked at the evidence, examined the testimony at all. She had accepted this as evidence of categorical evidence of rape and returned a finding. Now, if you examine, this may be possible if the family is living in a one-room tenement and a child is exposed to what happens in the night between a married couple. But if you're living in a large house where people have separate bedrooms, it is impossible for a child to know what happens. So I examined the testimony of the father of the child who had appeared as a prosecution witness, and it transpired that he was a driver. And what was even worse was that what he said was that the child's mother had abandoned her and him when the child was a few months old and left the house. So it is impossible that this child knew what happens between a husband and wife, and clearly a testimony was tutor testimony. But in para 54 of this judgment, then I also found out, now what does this recording of Buri Harkate, Galat Kaam and Buri Kaam show? It shows that people who are experts or trained in their field, the investigating officer who's a policeman, the magistrate who recorded the statement during investigation, and the trial court judge who's a sessions judge conducting the trial, an experienced judge, were very bashful of in going into matters involving sexual relations, and they recorded this statement in the vaguest possible terms without even making an effort to bring out the ingredients of the offense. This is the second thing which comes out very starkly in this case. Third, and injustice meted out by conducting the investigation and trial and recording the statement to the accused person accused of rape. This young boy spent 5 years or 9 years of his life in jail because of this kind of testimony. He was convicted as well. Now, the second thing which is brought out was that this child was a Tamilian child and her testimony was being recorded in Delhi. The investigating officer hailed from Haryana. The trial court judge was from Delhi, Old Delhi, and the magistrate was from Old Delhi, and the trial judge came from another part of the country. This Tamilian child was a driver's daughter, so probably didn't even speak the best of Tamil, maybe speaking using colloquialisms, etc. Now, what was her comfort level with speaking in Hindi, in which her evidence was being recorded? We have nothing on record to say that the child was very comfortable with the Hindi language, or that these people, the trial court judge, the magistrate who recorded a statement, or the investigating officer, made any effort to ascertain the language of the child. So I noted in my order how language of the child can be a huge barrier to access to justice of a child victim, especially in a case of sexual violence. And language is important to doctors. You record histories. I have in my family, I have a Bengali cardiologist who went to work sometime abroad. He went to Saudi Arabia for some time. And I was stunned to see him sitting trying to learn Arabic. And I asked him, what are you doing? He says, if I don't know the language, how will I understand what the patient is telling me, what he is complaining of? So same is with the plight of a doctor who goes to study in Bilor from Punjab, or somebody who comes from, the Northeast to, Hindi speaking Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh. So language is so important, and language of the child, which is not only verbal, it's so much about the language of the child is non-verbal, and how important it is for us to make structures, especially in courts, so that the testimony of the witness of a child as in the witness box is truly meaningful. The third thing which also came out was that this child must have testified in a courtroom standing next to the accused. So, we've heard so much about secondary traumatization. I can speak all evening on secondary traumatization of children in the court, because the criminal justice system was not been designed, or the court system has not been designed with children in mind. Today we have become sensitive and we are putting in measures. But when this child testified in 2005, certainly the justice system was not looking at making the system friendly. So I observed and noted that what Rajiv Seth has also pointed out, that following uniform procedures does not work justice in all cases. The courtroom or the civil criminal justice system was not designed with the children in mind, and we have to take special measures. Then the fourth thing, rehabilitation and counseling post courtroom procedures. We haven't even begun that conversation even yet. There's nothing on record except one document which deals with this. And I've already mentioned how bashful we are, in articulating matters involving anything to do with sex. So in the light of the evidence which was brought before me, I had acquitted. But I had found, I'd done a lot of research while dealing with this case, that the Supreme Court of India and the several, not many high courts, had laid down series of guidelines on every aspect of the criminal justice system of sexual violence cases. And I had collated these guidelines. Now, these guidelines permit related to every aspect of sexual violence, from from recording of an FIR or statement by the investigating officer, the medical examination, the court testimony, all of that was collated, and I put them all together subject-wise in this judgment, Virendra versus State. In para 50, in para 54, I think, I've dealt with the requirement of medical examination, and I just quickly run this through you. Where is it? Page 54, sorry, not para 54. I'm not very good with technology. I'm so used to a system. So managing in these days of lockdown has been a challenge. I began with police, then dealt with what the police is required to do. And para 50, page 54 is medical examination. So, the first thing which had, as back as long time back in a very old judgment of Delhi High Court, orientation must be given to doctors who prepare MLCs or conduct postmortems to ensure that MLCs as well as postmortem reports are up to the mark and stand judicial scrutiny. While conducting, this was the first, the guidelines are there, and this is still good judgment. Justice Verma Commission, which was recorded, which was constituted after the Nirbhaya rape case in 2016, in 2012, has referred to and reproduced, extracted this judgment, several portions of the judgment in 16 pages. And the CRPC 2013 Amendment, Criminal Law Amendment Act, was based a lot on what had been observed here. So, if you would look at these guidelines, I think they have been circulated. But as a result, I'll come back to recording of MLCs. I'll refer to another case before I close today. As a result of this judgment, Chief Justice A.P. Shah in the Delhi High Court had constituted a committee to see the working of the guidelines and appointed me as the chair. So the first thing that I had done was frame rules for interpreters and translators, which included interpreters of sign language. You need assistance also for evaluating the testimony of mentally challenged persons. And you need specific rules for translators, linguistic experts. And these rules we had framed so that the trial courts had available a method of taking the assistance of interpreters and translators in Delhi. Then I also, as I traveled for different professional reasons, I visited facilities all over the world, in United Kingdom and New Zealand, about special facilities in sexual violence cases, especially for children in the witness box. I have engaged with an organization called Child Witness, which is run by Karen Holley and Karen Mueller in South Africa. Karen is here with us. She's probably joined us. Jagdish, I think she has joined, and also with an organization called Families in Court, run by Alison Cunningham in Canada. I examined rules from across the globe, Zaire, Russia, Canada. Then I saw pictures of facilities in Scandinavian countries of special facilities. And then I started looking at building a courtroom, a similar courtroom in Delhi, which would be ideal. Now we had no budget. If those of you who work with the government know what is the importance of budget. So there was nothing like a budget for creating a special facility. So I called the district judges and asked them if they would give me some space in the district court. I think all the judges, I was a high court judge, but I think all the district judges thought I was a fool and was out of my mind and didn't know what I was talking about, except one learned judge. He later became a judge of the High Court, Justice P.S. Teji. He gave me space in the Karkaruma district court. So I got one courtroom, one judge's room, and one corridor to convert into, and an Ailmats room to convert into a vulnerable witness deposition complex. With no facility, no budgetary allocation, we carved out a waiting room for these special witnesses in the corridor. At the same time, I had an audit of cases involving child witnesses done, of sexual violence done, and a special audit of cases involving child witnesses. And I used psychologists. I called Dr. Achal Bhagat, to guide us as to what should be the kind of walls we should have, pictures, etc. And I learned from experts, psychologists, as to how prone children are to suggestion, and that I should not put pictures or any printed material around them which could suggest to them what their testimony should be. So we painted the walls very beautiful pastel colors. We left crayons, we left plasticine, we left drawing books, but we didn't leave cartoons and animations and books in the room. At the same time, while we were creating this space, the intention was to create a gap between the offender and the child when the child has to testify, and provide a special entrance, keep the child completely a witness of sexual violence completely segregated from the rest of the court system, the lawyers, the accused. And so we carved out a special entrance, a special passage, a special waiting room, a deposition room where the witness would sit with a facilitator, isolated from the courtroom, and would give a testimony without even knowing she was testifying. The court was connected, the facilitator was given an earpiece, and the judge would put the question to the facilitator through the earpiece. The facilitator would only repeat the question to the witness, and the witness would speak as if she was having a regular, ordinary conversation with the facilitator, all of which was visible to the courtroom and audible to the courtroom by use of a 360-degree camera. So at all times, the witness was visible, and her whatever she was doing and saying was visible in the courtroom on a large LCD which was displayed in the courtroom. So we also defined a vulnerable witness whose testimony would be recorded in such a facility as not only a child witness, but a victim of a sexual violence, an adult victim of sexual violence, could be a boy, could be a man, and a witness in dangerous crimes, could be a person of the LGBT community. At the same time, we drafted extensive guidelines, putting in very important safeguards to protect the psychological trauma of the child. We put in the requirement of a pre-visit to the court complex of the child, where the facilitator would explain the path the child would walk, and the child could have an interface with the judge, a pre-conversation with the judge where the judge could explain the procedure. This is one part of the program which is not happening because of lack of time. But by and large, this program is very, very successful. And the segregation of the witness is complete, absolutely complete. I'm told by judges that the testimony of the witnesses is transformed. On the first date, they come with a lot of trepidation and a lot of nervousness. But when they see the manner in which they're treated, I'm talking of adult victims of sexual violence as well. We have a pantry, we've kept snacks in case the case gets laid over after lunch, they get food, and they're so happy with the treatment they get that on the second visit, they want to bring their Thai, Chachi, aunt, uncle, neighbors to show how special this is. This court was inaugurated on the first court was inaugurated on 12th of September 2012. Nirbhaya happened on 16 December 2012. Delhi was already sensitized, the Delhi trial courts were already sensitized to the special treatment with victims of sexual violence needed. But unfortunately, we still got labeled as the most insensitive people. Till August 2018, when I left Delhi, we were able to inaugurate. I was continue to head this committee for a long time, and we were able to record almost 6,000 witnesses' evidence in these courtrooms. We were able to put these courtrooms in almost all except one district court complex, and over 6,000 witnesses had testified. And what was so important, that so important was that we had the inputs from experts from not only across the globe, but psychologists from Delhi. And to minimize the trauma, we had put in interaction with the judges and also factored in counseling post deposition. Those guidelines are available on the net of the Delhi High Court. We have also implemented them in Jammu and Kashmir, where also have inaugurated such courtrooms in Srinagar, in Pulwama, in Ganderbal, in several areas. But the biggest thing was that we did this was judicial intervention, judicial initiative, completely without any budgetary allocation. We carved out this facility out of existing facilities, existing resources, and we can really achieve a lot if we put our mind and heart. As I said, counseling and the pre-visit is something which I was unable to factor in because there's so much else going in. Picking up the facilitator, ensuring the trainings. We undertook a 2-day training which was called, sensitizing the recording of all the stakeholders in all the features of sexual violence, and which began from recording of the FIR to compensation to conviction to trial, the importance of forensic medicine. In fact, it is during these trainings that I had opportunity to interact with Vidya Reddy of Tulir. She's been working with you people, with the Professor Jagdish Reddy, with the Padma Deostali at Sehat in Mumbai, and a host of other experts, Geeta Ramaseshan, Binda Govar. We did 2 sessions which we called Voices from the Margins, to sensitize judges, prosecutors, lawyers, legal aid lawyers, police personnel on all facets of the training of the sexual violence and the impact on the victim. So these 2 sessions on Voices from the Margin, one included all aspects of disability, victims who are disabled who face sexual violence, mental health issues, physical disability, hearing impairment, speech impairment. We questioned the judges, as to, we asked the judges to respond and took them through the entire scientific basis as to why will you, not rely on the testimony of a disabled child, a child who is able to, identify her or his mother because of the love which is showered on him or her by the parent or the sibling. Why will you disbelieve such a child when he or she identifies the perpetrator of the most gravest of violence, that is sexual violence on him or her, or the evidence of the identification by a blind person. So these are very, very important facets. We brought in people from the LGBT community who spoke as to how much they mistrusted the system, and that they would never approach the courts if they had to complain of sexual violence. We heard of children who were brutalized and exposed to so much violence when they revealed their homosexual preference, their sexual preference to their parents, and who were subjected to electric shocks. in some of the most major hospitals, even in Delhi. You know, we had people from the transgender community who said that somebody wants me to speak about the role of the media, but that's another whole evening's work. You know, I only have 20 minutes left, but this is one of the questions in the chat. But I wanted to tell you, speak about this LGBT community. This transgender is Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi. She's 6 feet 3 inches, very flamboyant. You know, she wears bright, bold jewelry and very bright colors. She stood in this room, district court, in front of judges and police personnel and raised this question: Am I blind? Oh, am I invisible? And there's pin drop silence, stunned silence, because Lakshmi is certainly not invisible. She's more visible than the most visible people. So she repeated the question, and then came a loud roar. Of course not. So then Lakshmi's next question speaks volumes. You know, she said, "Then why do you treat me so?" You know, so what she was pointing out is that society treats transgenders as non-existent. You know, as if they don't have any rights. And we brought in a sex worker from Sangli to sensitize people on the rights of everybody, of this thing. And we had whole sessions on children, the Juvenile Justice Act and POCSO. So I'm told that the judgments in Delhi are even today very different trial court judgments from the kind of the sensitization which the trial courts are displaying from the rest of the country. So I hope we are able to carry this work. I hope I'll be able to do some work and, you know, do something to ensure that the training is replicated and it is carried out and more people are trained. With the help of Dr. Jagdish and Vidya Reddy and Sehat, we also started the training of doctors on doing medical examinations, recording of MLCs, postmortems, you know, the relevance and irrelevance of forensic evidence in Delhi. We walk doctors through the whole path, you know, from when a victim comes before them till that evidence is recorded in the court. You know, you receive a summon from court and you're going to court and you get an urgent call from your hospital that the child you operated upon or you were treating needs very urgent treatment. Doctor, come back. So you're in such a conundrum. What do? Do you go to court, or do you go to back to the hospital? Will you get a warrant of arrest if you don't get to court? So these are the questions that we discussed with doctors. And in Delhi, I had put out an order saying that every summon to a doctor will every court will appoint a nodal officer and with the phone number and give it to put it on the summon when you're sending it to a doctor, so that the doctor knows who is the person to tell that whether she or he, the doctor, is able to reach the court, and if not, the reason for that. This is so important. You know, at the same time, I was working on ensuring trying to take steps that we could create, you know, these VC rooms where doctors could depose from the, you know, comfort and close proximity to their place of work, and give their evidence without having to go to, you know, informal, uncomfortable courtrooms, wait in corridors along with accused persons, and sometimes be treated with so much humiliation and not get the respect and the regard which the doctors do. You know, this training we had done, the health secretary had agreed, the medical superintendents of LNJP, Safdarjung and which was the third hospital, the Trans Jamuna. I'm sorry, you know, this is old age catching up. Senior.
GTB
And
hospital.
GTB hospitals, yes. And Dr. Reddy had identified the specialities. You know, we had used surgery, the emergency, the gynae obs, the psychiatry, forensics, and doctors. Initially, the doctors were not very excited about the training, but after the first impact of the first training was such that though we had room for only 40 doctors, every session was overrun with doctors who just came that we want to attend. And that is testimony to the kind of work that Dr. Jagdish Reddy did. We were able to do two of these trainings, one in Jammu and one in Srinagar as well. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has put a stop to a lot of things. But hopefully, Jagdish, I'm going to talk to the health secretary and see if we can do these online because these were very important part. As part of these trainings, we were also able to get the guidelines which were framed by the committee of experts. I think it was Dr. Jagdish Reddy and again Sehat were part of it, on how to record medical examinations. And we were in Delhi, we were able to persuade the Delhi government as well as the government of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh to notify these guidelines, and they have become applicable. Now, before, now what is very painful, yesterday I was just reading some legal journal on the internet, and there was a connect to a inauguration of a children's court, they called it. So I clicked the button and I was horrified to see what was identified. It appeared that this High Court had sent some engineers and some registrar to Delhi to see the vulnerable witness deposition complex. They just took an outline, a drawing of the architectural drawing, and went back and I made some structure. And the walls are plastered with animations of children and animals and cartoon figures. Everything that Dr. Achal Bhagat had said should not be on the walls of a children's waiting room, and even the deposition room. I forgot to tell you that my conversations with pediatricians and psychologists and reading material from Michigan and Scandinavia said children don't like to sit on sofas and chairs. They're happiest on sitting on the floor or even on a cushion. So in my deposition complexes, I have a sofa. I keep cushions and the dari on the ground for children if they want to sit on the dari when they're giving their evidence. And I have a table and chair if any witness is comfortable sitting on a table and chair. The options of the witness. I also got a report from Canada. I was reading a report that these trainings were between 2012 and 2018. And then in Kashmir, somebody put up a question, 2018 to 2020 till I retired, we took them into Jammu and Kashmir. Also, one of the children had said, whose witness testimony was recorded using a VC room, that she felt cheated. It is, she said that, she had come to tell the judge what had happened to her. And she did not get a chance to see the judge even, let alone speak to the judge. So, I realized that you have to give a choice to the witness to decide whether the witness wants to speak away from the courtroom or in the courtroom. But even if the witness is in the courtroom, a child witness is in the courtroom, the accused has to be kept away. So my courtroom includes not only this vulnerable witness deposition room, which is behind the court and connected with a video link, but also I have provided for a sofa in the courtroom in place of a witness box where the child and the facilitator sits. And there is an adjunct room with a one-way looking glass into the courtroom. The accused is brought into this room with the police and the door to the room is closed. The accused has a connection with an intercom whereby he can instruct his lawyers about whatever he wants to tell about the witness. And the accused can see and hear. We have provided the electronic equipment so that the room, whatever is said in the courtroom is audible to the accused. And he is in constant, interface. The evidence of whatever's happening in the courtroom is in the presence of the accused. But the witness has no interaction with the accused because from the courtroom, you can't see into the room. First, the accused is brought in the presence of the judge so that the judge knows that the accused is inside that room alone. And then the witness is brought in from the special passage and the waiting room. So, you have to be sensitive to the needs of the child, and you have to ensure, that is the best interest of the child, which is the driving force in everything that we do in the justice system, delivery system. Now we have only 10 minutes more, so I'll just talk quickly about what I want to take you back. That is to regarding of MLCs. I'll give you the facts about this case which I had done way back in 1990. Here Kamal Kumar was convicted of having murdered his girlfriend. The prosecution case was that he had put kerosene over his wife and burnt her. There's no time, but what was the evidence against him? was 5 dying declarations. First was history of, recorded first dying declaration was, first declaration was to the aunt, Mosi of the victim. The second was to the mama of the victim. The third was to the father of the victim. The fourth was to the investigating officer. The fifth was to the doctor who recorded history of having been burned by husband by pouring of kerosene. And lastly, there was also a dying declaration recorded by the STM. Now, this time is very short, but the incident happened, and at 10:30 was the allegation, and she died early morning. The next day at 4:45 p.m. But what is very important was 100% burns. The postmortem recorded trachea had blackish mucoid, and the MLC is very important. I need to just give me a moment to get the judgment out.
Ma'am, you can have some more time.
You must be all tired souls sitting here listening to law without your dinners.
Your passion, your work keeps all us active now.
Very true.
No, I'll just talk about medicine here, I actually read Harrison, it is on medicine to the judge, which is the text, which is the medical text, Harrison.
Yeah, Harrison, Davidson.
Yeah, Harrison. So this was in 1990. I was a very young lawyer of 9 years vintage. I was enrolled at the bar in 1981. I don't know how to get to the page, so I have to scroll the whole judgment. Just 1 minute. I'll just read to you the ingredients of the MLC. And the victim in this shape was said to have given 5 dying declarations. The one to the SDM was in, they had said husband, actually this boy and girl were in a love affair. Probably the girl was pregnant from him. Parents on both sides were opposing the marriage. And the trial, nobody argued this before the trial court, but I was able to persuade the High Court. There's no evidence of the marriage. And this woman, the MLC records the dying declaration. This is what the doctor has recorded. Information given by the patient herself, alleged to have been burned, burn injuries at 11 p.m. on 19 January 98 at her residence. Full address. 100% burns this girl had. And pulse was not recordable. BP was not recordable. Nothing. And this doctor is writing residence F495 Dakshin Puri, where her husband poured kerosene on her, oil on her, and lighted her clothes with matchstick. Now the trial court, the High Court disbelieved in para 49 of this judgment. This is what the judge's division bench of the High Court wrote. If the said MLC is carefully read, then it would be quite clear that it has been mentioned therein that condition of the patient is very critical. Patient and pulse and BP could not be verified. Dehydration very high. Dehydration, the court notes that he has mentioned dehydration plus. And capillary circulation poor. It also further mentioned that the superficial and deep burn present over forehead, neck, chest, abdomen, back, both upper limbs and lower limbs, 100% burns. It is very pertinent to note that it is said the MLC is nowhere mentioned that the patient is conscious and fit to make a statement. The recording of the history further shows that the case paper prepared at OPD, which is usually prepared as soon as the patient is brought to the hospital, does not mention that the patient was conscious and fit to make a statement, and that the patient had given any history regarding burns. In view of all the above circumstances, it does not seem at all probable that in such a condition the patient would give history as claimed by the doctor. Then the doctor's endorsement shows that patient has stated she was set on fire, and then the court goes into the contradiction. But interestingly, you know, this gentleman writes, this doctor has written, Dr. Sunil Kalra. Very interesting. God knows where the doctor is. Information given by patient herself. So, you know, I'll share, this is on a lighter note. I took this MLC, you know, I didn't know too much about medicine. I took this to my brother-in-law, he's a cardiologist. And I showed him, I said, Tushar, I am showing you this MLC. Is this patient capable of speaking? And he had said he takes his degree, that she couldn't have uttered one word. So I went to the judge. So I said, can you give me any medical text to support this? So I took, that's where I got the Harrison on medicine from. And I took that heavy book with thin paper. I don't know how you people all read such fine print, you know, you know. And I read it to the division bench, and I persuaded them to accept that all this. And the SDM had recorded a 2-page statement contributed by a person who was in such a shape, you know, who had been even administered painkillers after the admission, you know. Para 51 of the judgment records painkillers, and I'll just show it to you what the judge says. In the case papers on record, this also I went through, there was a thick sheaf of papers from the Safdarjung hospital. Then it would be quite clear that in the case paper, it has been clearly mentioned that this Dr. Sunil Kalra had advised to give her painkiller medicines, and his endorsement on the case paper shows that he had prescribed morphine. The case papers further shows that 10 ml of morphine was injected at 2:30 a.m. Even witness killing medicine, so on. She was given morphine at 2:30 when the patient at 100 degrees. So the court was persuaded to believe. So, you know, and this was a pro bono brief. I was appointed an amicus curiae by the court. It was a, you know, one amicus curiae is friend of the accused when they don't have money to engage a lawyer. And the court was persuaded to accept. I pointed out from other evidence that this was a case of suicide. But what I want to tell you is that, you know, when you write alleged history of H/O of, you know, you can send a person to the gallows. Please remember, you know, who's around, relatives are around, IU is around, you know, your own bias. I, as a judge, would find it very difficult to disbelieve a 7-year-old child, 8-year-old child, or a conviction for rape. You know, there's utter revulsion inside you when such a thing is brought before you. You know, it's so important for us as judges. This was my training, my refrain, my, you know, takya kalam to judges. I used to say it continuously, that sit back and think, you know, you think back and remove all your biases, you know, from your mind. And, you know, when you are giving a judgment, or when you're writing you know, a case history, you know, when a patient is brought to you in the emergency, again, you're overworked, you know. If somebody is brought to you when gastroenteritis is on the run in Delhi, you know, you will be you won't have the time or space in an LNJP or Safdarjung hospital emergency to spend much time with the patient. So therefore, you should, you know, be very, very careful when you're recording the history. Be conscious that when that statement, and if the patient dies, it tantamounts to a dying declaration. Section 32 of the Indian Evidence Act makes anything said by a person with regard to the cause of his death, you know, as admissible in evidence, even though the person is, no, when the person is no more, you know, is dead, because even without cross-examination. So what you have recorded will be accepted as the witness having said as truth, without the accused having a chance to rebut or cross-examine. And, you know, you know, in our country, the court is empowered to impose the death sentence on an accused based on such a dying declaration. And there are cases where dying declarations of this kind have sent people in for life, you know. And, you know, there are cases where, you know, if there's a love affair and the couple gets married without the parents' approval, they have children, and a stove bursts, or there is a real accident, you know, and the wife dies. the in-laws quickly use that. They blame the man for taking away their daughter. So they will look at it as an opportunity of getting revenge. And there are so many times, there are cases where, you'll get these kind of complaints by the parents of a girl who has died in a real accident case, that the man has burned their daughter, or he claimed dowry, or these kind of allegations. There are cases where this is the truth also, it's genuine also. But you as doctors have to isolate yourself from prejudice and biases and be absolutely objective in what you're recording. You shouldn't let prejudice or bias guide you when you're recording a history. I'm not at all saying that if you're being told that husband has burned and killed or in-laws have tortured, don't record it. Please do it. But ensure that you do it in a manner that, it is clear and it is free from bias. Somebody just penned a line that it is possible for somebody with 100-degree burns to go ahead and live. There was other evidence which I have not read to you. They had said that her clothes were intact in the house. She had probably stripped herself before she burnt, and the relatives had gone and poured kerosene over some clothes and planted them in the room, so which had been lifted in the evidence. And their oral testimony was so contradictory and conflicting. So there were several other reasons also for disbelieving the statement as having been made in. And it's the medical science is not 100% science. There's a lot of chance in it. Every medicine does not necessarily cure. So, I read a book on malpractice when the author had written that when you agree to a treatment by a doctor, you agree to take the chance that the treatment may not work. That's an inherent part of your contract with a doctor when you accept to be treated by him. So, there is no absolute terms in medical science that a person with 100-degree burns will speak or will not speak. But certainly in this case, there were enough attending circumstances which shows that this was somebody else's writing. Many cases in Bangalore have been closed as suicide. This wasn't such a case. I'm not saying that there are genuine cases of wives being burnt. I've always, whenever I used to get a lot of male lawyers saying, this is a case of false implication and women are always implicating falsely. So I always used to ask the male lawyers, then can you tell me as to why only women are burning and you don't hear of men burning? So, I agree with all of you when you say that there are a lot of genuine cases of violence against women. This was not the purpose of my bringing out this case to you, and we are not arguing for or against the truth or lies behind complaints being made by women. I'm just pointing out, it was my duty to tell you that when you record the history on the MLC, your role as a doctor is of very, very great significance. And that one statement that you record can actually send a person to the gallows. Lastly, I just want to compliment all of you and tell you that how blessed you are at having had this opportunity to actually work with children, and real-time work. I have tried to make the judicial system during my journey as a lawyer and as a judge slightly more compatible to their needs and accommodating their sensitivities. And I've used legal, but I'll close by sharing how I also use legal services to mainstream children, who had been led astray. In Kashmir, using legal services, we carved out a skilling program, which was called Hum Honar Hain, for children between 14 to 17-year-old, children who were school dropouts or were first-time offenders. You have all heard about stone pelters in Jammu and Kashmir, and it was so important to mainstream these children who had been led astray, who for 500 rupees pelt stone at our paramilitary forces and armed forces and injure so many of their own brethren, And I've also done a lot of work with SOS children. While working as a lawyer and as a judge, I visited and associated myself with the SOS village in Jammu. I used to work in Faridabad very closely with the green fields and the other SOS here, and also in Kashmir. But because of security concerns, I was not permitted to move out. So, my concern at this point, and I'm at a wit's end, but I will do something about is my concern with is for the COVID orphans. And I think we have to look out for them. I was talking to Reeti today, and she was telling me about the psychological issues and the counseling which these children need. That's an area which I cannot help at. But certainly, I think we need to look at creating special facilities to accommodate the needs of these children. Many of them will have a lot of property, which has to be protected. There'll be very unscrupulous relatives out to usurp the property of these hapless children. And I think we have to ensure that the state takes measures to for safeguarding the property as well as the not only the giving them emotional support, but my endeavor will be to ensure that all their rights and their properties are secured, and these children are able to are enabled access to education and the best help, psychological, physical, social, moral, and physical, in every sense. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of sharing a few thoughts with you. Back to you, Jagdish.
Ma'am, I think it was such a motivating, you have inspired all of us to continue further in this path wherein all our doctors, pediatricians of our group who are. Can you briefly give some advice to them to how to face the courtrooms also with a lot of innovations and changes, good practices which have come in? So it would be better if you can give a pep talk to
Jagdish, let's keep a session on that. You do that lovely walkthrough you used to do for my judges and the doctors in Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir. You have that wonderful presentation, that PPT. I'll help you with it. Let's keep a session for that. Both you and I can do it together. You be the leader in that. I'll just pipe in with whatever little. But Jagdish has a very good PPT, and he connects it to the court summon and everything. And I'm sure you'll enjoy that more than a rush 2-minute comment, Jagdish.
Okay, Rajiv, would you take over to introduce some of our
Yes.
esteemed
Justice Geeta Mittal, it's just been an honor that you came here and you spoke so much with passion. Protecting children, child rights is closest to our heart. And on the panel, we have some very distinguished I Council founders, chairmen, advisors. I just wanted just to introduce them. I know we have Jordan Greenbaum, who's joined from the US, and she's a mentor. And Jordan, you want to say hi to Geeta and Geeta ji. And we have Professor R.N. Srivastava, who's the founder advisor of the Indian Council Group. We have our chairperson here, Dr. Sandhya Khatse. Well, I introduced casually, she's there in the blue sari. If you can just, we have Dr. Uma Nayak, who's our secretary. We have Professor Shekhar Sheshadri from Women's, who's our mentor.
I know him.
Yes,
Hi,
Shekhar is here. We have Shaiba Saldana from Bangalore. We have Vidya Reddy here for you. Vidya has joined from Chennai, from Tulir. And
Why
we have
can't we see them?
Yeah, Vidya, can you show yourself if it is possible? And above all,
Vidya, I've been trying to talk to you for the last 1 week.
Yes, she's an extremely busy person. With Vidya, Shaiba is here. Shaiba Saldana is a mentor from Bengaluru. We have Professor Chandrika Rao. She's at the Ramaiah Medical College. And we do trainings, madam, for doctors. So far, more than about 700 doctors. And just last week, we had a full workshop, full day, which we have 400 participants from Bangalore. So this whole training program has been developed by our mentors, and with support from all the participants. We have about 81 regional, experts, all over the country, and we'll be very happy
Rajiv,
to share.
uh,
Yes, ma'am.
I just
Professor,
want to add something. Before you give the floor to to our friends who have joined. There's one more area which I wanted to touch, and there's for lack of time I didn't, but I must mention it to you. Is age determination, especially in the context of the provisions of the juvenile justice. I was sitting on the division bench, presiding over a division bench in Delhi High Court, where I came across the death reference. Death reference is a case where a death sentence has been imposed by a trial court, and that can be implemented only if it is confirmed by the High Court. And at that stage, when the case when the accused had been in jail for over 9 years and been sentenced to death for several years out of those 9, that one of the accused filed an application, took up a plea of juvenility. One after another, 3 of them did. And we found out that there were the medical evidence. We found out that there were only 13 years of age when the offense was committed. And it was so unfortunate, the trauma that these children had undergone. They'll never be able to come out of the time they spent in jail, and the thought of facing the death sentence for all these years. So that's another area that we can discuss another time, but it's very, very important so far as
Yeah.
doctors are concerned.
Yes,
I
and
think,
lastly, we have
ma'am-
Karen Hawley here. Karen, if you can just show. Karen is joining from South Africa, and Karen is someone that was introduced to us by Geeta Mittalji herself. She runs a whole non-profit about child witness. So we have so many. There are more than 100 people as delegates who are registered, and it's so exciting, madam, for your presentation. I mean, Jagdish, would you like to carry on? Or any
Yeah.
mentors, anybody wants to say a few words?
Ma'am, there are few questions on the chat box. One particularly regarding role of media with children who are in conflict with law. So could you throw some light saying that what measures are already in practice?
The law is very clear. The media cannot let the child do anything which will enable identification. There are 2 instances where they highlighted the victim. One is I'm forgetting the name of the case, but both related to Jammu and Kashmir. And I had issued notice in the Delhi High Court to the media for it's an offense both under the IPC and the child laws. One makes it a sentence of 2 years, and the other 3 mandatory imprisonment. And the witnesses had said that the news personnel, I issued notice to even the service providers, the Facebook and all of them. They were showing photographs, all the channels, Times Now, Star Plus, you name it, all of them, India Today, and they issued notices, and they all apologized. Initially, they were very belligerent. We were trying to curry compassion and, sympathy for the child. I said, the child doesn't need your sympathy. And even if I were to agree with you, the law doesn't permit it. And they agreed to pay, costs and for having committed the error. And they each of them deposited 20 lakhs. And we were able to garner almost 1.05 crore, I think, which I transferred from Delhi High Court to Jammu and Kashmir Legal Services Authority. I similarly took up suo motu cognizance in Jammu and Kashmir, where a child victim was being shown. So the media is completely prohibited from doing anything which will enable identity of the accused or a child offender, or not an accused offender, or a child victim to be identified.
Thank you,
Right.
madam. There is
Thank
one
you.
more question, particularly in diverse cases where the child custody is the question. Many of the stakeholders are not aware of the child rights, and there are false implication of children. So what would be the measures which are already in place?
So, in divorce cases, children would be used as victims. They would be pulled by the parent, husband or the wife, in his or her favor. to support them in their attempt to get a divorce. So, now I don't understand the question, Jagdish. What do they want to know?
They particularly want to know in divorce cases, the court many a time is not aware of the child rights, and there are pleas towards putting that there is a false case, a false memory in the children who needs to have custody. So those sort of issues. So like
You know
how
that
you have brought
that
it.
No, I was very strict on sensitizing and training judges. Continuing legal education was an absolute, what do I call it, fetish, phobia, mania with me. And I brought in judges from Jammu and Kashmir to Delhi for training, family court judges and legal services judges and juvenile justice boards. They weren't in existence when I went there in 2018. All of this was brought in after I went there, and I got them all trained, and I spent my entire winter vacations running around with these judges in the Delhi courts and Delhi institutions, JJBs and jails and everywhere, sensitizing them on all issues. So the only way out is training judges.
Another question is regarding medical legal examination in case of children who are in need of care, like the one which are rescued child laborers. So
Yeah.
what are the measures in place, particularly regarding child protection?
Oh, this
Child
is
labor.
reading the law. Why don't we keep it for another time? This is not really a question. The measures is child protection.
Yeah, that was
I-
regarding. Are there any measures for, particularly for medical examination of child laborers?
Every child who's rescued is subjected to, every person who's rescued is subjected to a medical examination. If you could ask Vidya to speak if she knows anything about this more than me. I'm not dealt in this area, but if you can reserve this question, when I come back next time, I'll answer.
Okay. So I think those were the specific questions which were there in the chat as well as in the Q&A. Over to Rajiv, if there are any issues from your end. Rajiv, you're muted.
Yes, I'm muted. Sorry. So it's been just a very absorbing session. I just wanted to invite our mentors and Vidya, if you're here, Vidya, could you just give your experience from the field, and Shaiba and Shekhar, if you can, and Chandrika here, our mentors from the network, if you can just give your experience and how we as doctors could benefit more from such interactions.
I'll be very brief, Rajiv, and very nice to meet you again, Geeta ma'am. I want to draw attention to one thing that Justice Geeta Mittal told me many years ago in the context of vulnerable witnesses. She said the issue is not what to ask. You know what to ask. The issue is how to ask. I have taken the liberty to put on chat, my friends, some work that we have done on developmental and mental health aspects of evidence gathering under POCSO, a manual that was released, a foreword of which was written by Honorable Justice Deepak Gupta, who was the chairperson of the Supreme Court Committee on Juvenile Justice, and which was released in February 8th last year, where we have looked both at CRPC 161, 164. It applies to any kind of evidence gathering for the evidence to stand in court. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we are having more and more complex issues to deal with. If one child is sexually abused by one known person and you're gathering evidence, it means one thing. When 47 children are abused over a 3-year period by multiple people, some known, some unknown, some drug assisted, which incident are you gathering evidence about? And indeed, when the Supreme Court instructed us to assist the CBI in the Muzaffarpur case, and we submitted a 157-page report that was included as the FIR, and as you know, the trial was held in the special court in Saket, which Justice Geeta Mittal was instrumental in actually setting up. And you know that the conviction came in December of 2019 and the sentencing in January. This is the importance of both medical evidence in terms of forensic medical evidence, as well as the kind of information that you gather from the children, which is which needs to be specific if the case has to stand in court. So this is something that we, as part of the National Initiative on Child Protection and Mental Health, supported by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, are extensively working on and continue to work on. In fact, we are now working with all the state legal services authorities and the judiciary. We've recently started work with the National Police Academy in Hyderabad as well to run a program for them on evidence on their work where 161 is concerned. So just a couple of things to say that work is going on, and for those of you who are interested, I would be happy to share more, more of the stuff that we are doing on this. Please do have a look at the link that I put on chat. Lovely to meet you, Geeta ma'am.
Lovely to see you again. We never could do what we wanted to. Mental health and jails. Unfortunately, time ran out and I retired.
Shaibia, you want to say a few words?
No, just that between the training of doctors, whereas if you look at the metropolises, Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, we may have some sort of, some rules, some systems, but if you look in the district quarters, it is horrendous. It is horrible. We're just working with pregnant girls, 13, 14, 15-year-olds being bounced from family to court, to police stations, to CWCs, to hospitals, and then they go beyond 20, 24 weeks and they stay with that pregnancy, which they have become through rape. I mean, it's horrifying. I don't even know whether we call it insensitivity, do we call it ignorance, do we call it just lack of some sort of social, I don't know, feeling. I don't even know where to start.
We have people like you working, Shabia. I'm sure we'll get there someday. But keep it up and keep on with it. As I say, lage raho munna bhai. I tried.
Vidya is there? Vidya?
Yeah, hi. Hello, ma'am. I know you've been trying to call me. I'll call you back. But hello, everyone. I think, normally what I would be saying in 1 hour, it's very hard to squeeze into a minute. But I think this is a great initiative, and I think we should have more of these for doctors. And I think it's very important to understand that.
Where are you, Vidya? We want to see you. Switch on your video.
Ma'am, I'm wearing my night clothes. I daren't put my video on. Sorry. So I think what's really important for everyone to understand is this multidisciplinary approach, that there is, unfortunately right now, there is a hierarchy. And I don't think that's going to work because each profession brings its own strength and skill sets into, assisting a child witness in terms of its robust testimony, in terms of the child's well-being. And I think that's very important to recognize and understand that we all have to work together, and that you need to know when you've gone past what you can do, and you need to refer on to the appropriate authorities. So that's just exactly what I just want to add on right now.
Vidya, you'll be happy to know that Karen has agreed. The Karens, not Karen, has agreed to help us here, with the doctors. So we'll be speaking on.
Hi, Karen.
She may have gone off now, the time difference.
No,
and all that.
I'm here. Hello, Vidya. It's so good to hear your voice.
Same here.
So you better get your video replayed, Karen.
I know, but you got me. I mean, I was supposed to be on for 5 minutes and I'm here still. So well done, love. This is brilliant.
Thank you. But for the benefit of all of you, we were able to get, Vidya and I did our best to get Karen to Chennai or to Delhi. We couldn't. UN UNICEF Srinagar was so good. We managed to get Karen's over for training into Srinagar. and they trained judges and the other stakeholders in Srinagar, at a wonderful training. So hopefully we'll have a conversation with them. They're doing trainings all over the world, Myanmar, Zimbabwe, Vietnam, writing rules. And they helped me with the Vulnerable Witness Deposition Complex in Delhi. And I was introduced to them by Vidya Tulir way back in 2009 or 10. So it's been a long association, and we look forward to this continuing relationship in ensuring justice to children across the globe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Rajiv?
Yes, Dr. Shrivastava has joined us. Dr. Shrivastava is the founder
Sorry,
of
I
the
just
Child
really
Abuse Group.
important call that came.
Dr.
It was
Shrivastava.
a very, very enlightening talk. And somehow we are not so familiar with all these legal things. We do need a lot of explanation and training. And Dr. Seth and Dr. Judician have been organizing this. A number of us have been trained, but there are many who have no idea what to do in these cases. And I have never been a witness, but one should be knowing all these. One should be aware of what's going on. And regarding the child, what you have mentioned here, child's interest in his emotional needs and all those are extremely important. A Dr. Seth has been doing a lot of work in this area. We have many other problems like child abuse and child, physical abuse. Again, what you have been doing, not many of these judges probably are following that. And I've seen the recording of child's, like in how they do it in USA, how these things are recorded and how the child is separated from the others. So, but these things are probably not being done on a very large scale here. Hopefully it will be done. Thank you very, very much for this talk. Extremely useful to us.
Thank you, Dr. Shrivastava, for your comments. Dr. Jagdish, over to you. Are there anything in the chat?
I've again asked, I think one participant, Mohsin Dar, wants to ask a question. I've asked him to put in the chat. I think he has raised the hand. Vishal, would you unmute him?
Geeta ma'am, you're muted.
Mohsin Dar is a lawyer from Kishtwar. I didn't know he was also here.
Yeah,
You
I
had
think
several
he has-
judges. You had several judges from Kashmir who had joined this also. All my trainee
Yes.
judges I had recruited.
Wow.
Farah Bashir, Uzma Amin. You would have seen a lot of names from Kashmir here.
Yes.
Today we had a complete India over here, all sorts of people, doctors, lawyers.
Multidisciplinary.
Yeah,
And
we
if
had
you
all.
give a write-up, they'll write about it in Jammu and Kashmir, about your organization and this today's program. If somebody
Yes.
can do a write-up, Rajiv.
Yes,
you go
yes,
and
ma'am.
say that.
We will get in touch with them.
Yeah, Mohsin Dar is a lawyer who writes for Bar and Bench, very popular legal journal.
Okay.
Right.
I think
Jagdish, any questions?
no. I think Mohsin Dar has left.
I think-
Okay.
Yeah.
We are almost 90 minutes. So I think it was wonderful session, madam. Okay, there is one. I wanted to know if psychosocial and mental health assessments done for the children reporting prior to talking to the child about the history of sexual assault by forensic experts, obstetricians, as mentioned in clinical practice guidelines.
Dr. Shedadri will answer this, or you will?
There is an extraordinary amount of international work on child witness preparation. Let's understand preparation is not the same as tutoring.
Mm.
And the right of a child to basically go through a program. So we have elegant programs which really look at the whole mental health dimension and the preparation of the child, particularly in instances where, as Shoaib pointed out, the kind of journeys they have to go through. And in the Muzaffarpur case,
Shekhar, yeah, Shekhar, Karen is going to do a program on whole program on how a child interview, how a doctor should be interviewing. What you call taking the history, how it should be done so that the testimony is not influenced. So let's keep it for that, and let's let the queryist join that program. They have really worked a lot in this field, and I think we'll get some very interesting inputs from Karen's on this.
Yes.
The whole business of doing the interview and how to take the history of a child, is very, very significant. And a lot of my learnings, of a lot of what I said has come from Karen's child witness.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And over to Raju.
Yeah.
So, so on behalf of our group here, the network, the Indian Cancer Group, I wanted to really profusely thank you, Justice Geeta Mittalji, for coming, sparing your valuable time, enlightening us. This was really truly a multidisciplinary gathering. We have people from various specialties within our doctors. We are from different specialties, and we have people from the judiciary and legal systems here as well. So this was extremely enlightening, and thank you. Our next webinar, we propose that the Child Witness Institute will take on June 18th. Will come up with their topic very soon and shortly. Till then, I wish you all stay safe. COVID is not gone. Take your vaccines and keep yourself blessed. We are going to have our new Cancel news coming up, and also wanted to let you know that the Indian Cancel Group is completing 25 years, Silver Jubilee this year. Had it not been for this COVID pandemic, we would have announced a conference. But hopefully we still, the dates are in mid-November, and that'd be a big program along with the Postgraduate Institute from Chandigarh, PGI Chandigarh. So just keep tuned with us and continue to attend our webinars. And these are really academic learning. Especially, thank you, Justice Geeta Mittalji, and thank you. It's just been so enlightening. I'm really thankful to Dr. Jagdish for moderating this session, Professor Srivastav, and all the mentors who came in full quota. Thank you. We had more than 130 participants, and so thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Have a good
Thank
night.
you, ma'am. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
all.
you and good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.